Please divorce me for the sake of your life." It was 20 years ago that my ex-wife said that to me. We met at a small-town factory. Back then, I was a fresh graduate from a technical high school and a new employee, while my ex-wife, Emily, was the daughter of the president. She was attending college and would often help out at the factory. We were both in our late teens and got along well due to our close age. It's amazing, you can operate such complex machines so easily. Well, I did get a bit of practice in the tech program at school, so I've got the hang of it. I always make defective products according to my dad, so he says I'm not cut out for machine work. I guess I just don't have the talent. She looked somewhat downcast as she said this, which I found quite adorable. After that, whenever Emily visited the factory, we would have lunch together, talk about machinery, and spend time together. She was a cheerful girl, always smiling, and seeing her smile made me want to keep talking to her forever. Time flew by, and I turned 25. I was well regarded at work and steadily climbing the ranks. After graduating, she got a job at a different company and stopped visiting the factory. But I couldn't forget about her. Then, one day, something happened. As I returned from work, I saw an unfamiliar woman standing in front of my apartment. Is that her? She looked so different, I barely recognized her, but it was indeed Emily. It's been a while, but what brings you here? Sorry, I just found myself here before I knew it. I was living in a company dorm, and her house was just beyond that. I remembered we often used to walk home together. Is something wrong? Let's not stand here, let's go to the cafe across the street. Okay. We sat down and ordered 2 coffees. Her hands were red from the cold as she warmed them on the cup, then took a sip of coffee before slowly starting to talk. My parents suddenly suggested a matchmaking. I said I didn't want to get married yet, that I wanted to work, but my dad just yelled at me. He said I should marry soon and start a family, that it gets harder as you get older, and he wouldn't listen. Why did you come to me? I thought, you might be able to do something. It was a crazy story. Not to toot my own horn, but I think I'm a trusted employee, even by the president. But when it comes to fixing family squabbles, I'm at a loss for ideas. How about just getting together with me? I said it as a joke. She blinked and then said, "That sounds good." Her smile was carefree. "That's right, I'll become your wife." That was just a joke. I'm not joking. Her cheeks puffed up adorably. She seemed more mature over the years, but inside, she hadn't changed at all. Thinking this, I smiled at her. "What's so funny?" "Nothing. I just thought you've become more beautiful, but you're still you." "What does that mean?" She looked somewhat shy, which I found quite cute. Meeting her again after so long, I was sure she was the one for me. We moved quickly after that. She sorted out her belongings from the apartment she rented, and I looked for a house for us to live in. Then I informed President Carter about it. It was like an official announcement of our relationship. For me, it was also like a confession with my future life at stake. I'd like to date your daughter with marriage in mind. I want to live together with her. President Carter was surprised, but his wife, who handled the accounting at the factory, said, "You are serious and trustworthy. I feel safe entrusting our precious daughter to you. We always see how hard you work." She gave her full approval of our relationship. Even though it was a small factory, she was the president's daughter. It took courage and determination to express my desire to date her with the intention of marriage. After hearing the President Carter's wife's words, I was deeply relieved after several sleepless nights of anxiety. Following that conversation, I worked even harder. I wanted to live up to the trust her parents had shown in me by working even more energetically than before. I revised the factory operations and successfully increased production efficiency. Sales increased day by day, and the company's performance visibly improved. Eventually, we get married and officially became husband and wife. A year later, we had a daughter, and our family grew. Later, I was recognized for my performance and became the factory manager. The company grew larger, thanks in part to the booming economy. I thought this happiness would last forever. But life doesn't always go as planned. One day, my wife collapsed and was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. It was uterine cancer. She had to be hospitalized and underwent surgery. That was the start of a chain of misfortunes. Affected by the bankruptcy of a major overseas company, the economy started to falter. At the factory, where we had been working overtime every day, we suddenly had nothing to produce, and there were days when we couldn't even get paid. "We're done for. I'm sorry, but I think we need to close down the company." "No way. President Carter, you're kidding, right? I'm sorry, but there's nothing more I can do with my own power. We couldn't fight the tide of the world." But at a time like this, I thought we should support each other as a family. That's when, out of the blue, my wife said to me, "Please, let's get a divorce. I want you to start a new life." "What are you talking about all of a sudden? I can't just leave you and our daughter, especially now. We should be uniting as a family to get through these tough times." She shook her head. "I actually had someone I loved, but I couldn't marry him, so I chose you. I haven't forgotten about him even now." "What are you saying?" Her words left me stunned. And then she continued, "After breaking up with him and starting to date you, I soon realized I was pregnant. That child might not be yours." Back then, DNA testing wasn't common. There was no way to know whose child it was. I looked at our daughter. She was reading a picture book while hugging a stuffed animal, overflowing with cuteness. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm sorry. Silly daddy." She called me daddy and laughed. Even as I felt guilty for harboring doubts about her, the question in my mind wouldn't stop. Is this child really mine? Or is she, as my wife said, the child of the man she loved? Can I continue to love this child as I do now? And to think, my wife had someone else she loved. Can you give me some time to think? My mind was in complete chaos. I left home for a while and moved into a business hotel to think things over alone. After a few days of contemplation, I went back home and told my wife, "I'm sorry, let's get a divorce. I'm sorry." My wife gave a weak smile, and I couldn't bear to look at her directly. And so, we got divorced. Her parents took in her and our daughter, promising to stay with them until she recovered. I left the factory I had worked at for years and moved to a distant rural town. I started a life alone. Before I knew it, 20 years had passed since I divorced my wife. Not a day went by without me thinking about my wife and daughter. But I thought I had no right to know how they were doing now. Then, one day, something happened. I received a phone call. "Hello, is this Dad?" I was startled by the voice. It sounded just like my wife when she was young. "Is that you, Hope?" "Yes, it's me." "I'm surprised. What's up all of a sudden?" "I had a detective agency find your contact." There was a tense air in our first conversation in a long time. "I see. I know everything. Mom told me, so I have something I need to tell you." "Something you need to tell me?" "I took a DNA test. I am definitely your daughter." I was speechless at Hope's words. "So, I have a request. Will you meet Mom?" "How is Mom doing?" "She's fine." "That's good." Tears rolled down my cheeks. "So, will you meet her?" "Yes, I'll go see your mom." I said it hesitantly. That day, from morning, I was filled with tension and anxiety. This small factory of my ex-wife's family owned was still active, albeit on a smaller scale. My grown-up daughter stood in front of the familiar factory. "Dad, Hope waved her hand. Next to her, a young man who seemed to be an employee shouted from the factory window, "President Carter, there's a call from AB Trading for you." President Carter? No way, you've become the president. I'm the one who revived this factory. Hope seemed to have relaxed as we were talking, the tension in her tone gone. It almost closed down, but Grandma and Grandpa kept it going somehow, and I took over after graduating from school. That's amazing. Walking through the factory nostalgically with my daughter, Hope proudly shared. Then she told me about what happened for the past 20 years. Mom's illness, she's completely better now. She swims at the sports center every morning before work. She's very healthy. Then about how she went to the same technical high school as me and studied business administration in college. How she clashed with her grandfather, the former president, while developing new products and expanding customer base. And then I learned she hadn't remarried. Mom has been looking at your picture and crying all this time. That's why I took the initiative to get a DNA test, to prove to her that I'm your daughter. When I did, she cried all night. She was happy to find out you're my child. I asked tentatively. But she was sorry for making me do such a thing. She lied about having someone else she loved and cried. What, really? My head spun in panic. Mom confessed that she said those things because the factory was in trouble. Her health was bad, and she didn't know what would happen in the future. She didn't want to tie you down, and has regretted it ever since, crying as she told me. Hearing the truth from Hope, I was speechless. And I painfully understood my wife's feelings, because I felt the same. Dad, how's your health? How do you know about that? I found out when I asked the detective agency to look for your contact. 20 years ago, you were diagnosed with liver cancer and given a terminal prognosis. After my wife brought up divorce, I fell and went to the hospital, where it was discovered my liver cancer had progressed. She figured you thought it was best to leave me with Mom's parents since you were sick. Mom wasn't well, and I was little. She was right. Indeed, when I heard from Emily about the possibility of the child not being mine, I was shocked. But, more than that, my illness had been discovered, and in the midst of my wife's poor health and the family business struggling, I thought my presence would be a burden, a hindrance. That's why I suggested the separation. I've been in and out of the hospital quite a bit since then, but miraculously, I've recovered, I said with a wry smile. That's good, Hope said, relieved. You know, both Mom and Dad, you say it's for the other person, but it's like fighting a one-sided battle. It ends up affecting the child, you know. Hope puffed her cheeks. She looked just like Emily when she was young. But you know, I understand that it's all because of love. Both of you suffered a lot. Hey, Dad, there's no more reason for us to live apart. I think we can be together. Hope concluded the conversation. When had my daughter grown up so much? Tears spilled from my eyes, unstoppable. Darling, as I left the factory, there stood Emily in front of me. She had aged but was still as adorable as ever, unchanged from those times. I'm sorry. That's my line. At my words, my wife looked a bit surprised. Welcome back, Dad. My daughter smiled at me. After 20 years, I was finally able to return to my family. I will never be apart from them again. The three of us embraced each other,